Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first webinar in our fall lineup here at Farm to Institution New England. Today we're welcoming Seth Rosen of the Cape Cod Fisheries Trust, which is a project of the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance, and also Mark Hayes of MIT Dining. They're going to be sharing the story of this chowder development project and how it addressed a number of community needs exacerbated by the pandemic. My name is Tanya Taranovsky. I'm the Director of Programs at FINE, and I'll be monitoring the webinar. Also helping out on today's webinar is my colleague, Sarah Lyman. She's our Communications Manager. You'll see her helping out in the chat today. If you want to take a minute to introduce yourself so that you can see who else is on the webinar, it would be great to do that. Just go ahead and throw your name and your organization into the chat. And also, if you'd like to, what your connection is to local seafood. All right. I'd like to just start and give you a brief outline of what we're planning for today. After a brief introduction, I'm going to hand things over to our speakers. You'll hear first from Seth Rosen and then from Mark Hayes. Then we're going to make sure to leave plenty of time for questions, so feel free to use our question and answer button for that. And we look forward to hearing from you all and taking questions and having a little bit of a dialogue as well. At the end, we'll share a link to a survey, and if you take a moment to just answer that, that would be really great. We'd appreciate your feedback. And then finally, we're going to end and wrap up with a few helpful resources and ways to continue to connect. So before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about Farm to Institution New England. FINE is the backbone organization for a network of across 6 states of New England of nonprofit, public and private entities that are all working to mobilize the power of regional institutions to transform our food system for the better. We're all working to increase the amount of good food that is served in our regions, schools, hospitals, colleges, correctional facilities, and other institutions. And these webinars that we're starting are just one way to connect and to share stories. For more information about FINE, you can check out our website at farmtoinstitution.org. I'd also like to tell you a little bit about the Farm and Sea to Campus Network here in New England. This network is a community of higher education and food system stakeholders who, in coordination with FINE, are connecting, sharing, and collaborating to develop transparent regional supply chains and to educate campus communities about regional food systems. This is a group that meets regularly to talk about ways that they can support each other, connect with each other, and learn from each other. The webinars, like I said, are just one way that we do this, and we hope to continue to convene people around key issues in our food system. For more information, you can check out the link in the chat that Sarah's sharing. She'll connect you to more information about the network. As we get started, I'm just going to remind you that you're probably all really familiar with Zoom at this point, and I don't need to tell everybody about chat and Q&A, but those are the 2 functions we're going to be using today. So feel free to dialogue with each other in the chat, and make sure that you use the Q&A for our questions for our speakers and for any questions you might have. And if you do put them in the chat, Sarah will be there to try to help make sure that we get those asked and answered as well. All right. And then without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our 2 speakers. As I mentioned, we will have Seth Rosen. He'll be up first. He's the director of Cape Cod Fisheries Trust, and he'll be telling us about the concept of this project, how it got started, the partners that were involved, and where it's going. And Mark Hayes from MIT Dining is going to be joining us to talk a little bit more about the institutional perspective and how they brought this chowder into MIT Dining. So with that, I am very excited to hand things over to Seth, and then after that to Mark. Seth, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm gonna share my screen. And hopefully you all will see what I'm going to be talking about here. If all has gone well, you see a little logo for the Fishermen's Alliance. So Seth Rosen is my name, and I'm very glad to be with everybody. This is just a really wonderful organization, FINE, and to be sitting with Mark Hayes from MIT is a special treat for me, really one of the highlight folks, as the fishermen would say, a highliner in your industry. So it's really great to have Mark there. Um, just very quickly about me. I have not been a fisherman my whole life. I really have been a journalist most of my life. Have done a lot of writing and reporting both regionally and nationally, been very lucky. About 10 years ago, I stepped out of my journalistic role to help a dear old friend of mine named Dan Wolf, who became the state senator for the Cape and Islands. And I served with Dan for 6 years as his chief of staff and senior advisor. And all along the way, the role of the journalist and the role of the advisor at the State House was comparable. Thinking about our community, thinking about ways that you connect dots, who's making decisions, who's benefiting, how do you help people be involved in that process? All of that led me to the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance. As a young reporter, I had seen the organization form 30 years ago. Its goal has been consistent and, in my mind, beautiful, which is to support the small boat independent fleet of New England, to try to stay on the water, to continue the historic fishing that has made our communities what they are when you go back to the very beginning, in the face of all kinds of interesting challenges. And again, to connect the dots, to see how we can help individual small boat fishermen succeed and continue to supply the great food that has kept us all rolling along for so many years. The Fisheries Trust that I run manages quota, manages fishery assets in a community bank so the fishermen can continue to take advantage of them. So as you might imagine, when COVID hit, these fishermen, my friends and colleagues, were really facing a challenge that they have never faced before. This is a community that is used to being nimble, that's used to being responsive to weather, to markets, to breakdowns, to crew issues, to lack of fish, to the plenty of fish. But in this case, they were seeing that the infrastructure had broken down. There was no expectation that they were going to be able to sell anything. The restaurants had closed. Many of these fishermen are the freshest boat fishermen in the country, so they're delivering directly to restaurants and high-end markets. Others are shipping overseas. The overseas market had fallen down. So as an alliance and as a trust, we looked at each other and said, how can we help keep this remarkable community intact and weathering another crisis? We looked at a lot of possibilities. One of them was to go back in time, to reinstitute the ancient practice of fishermen selling directly off their boat when they come into their port. We've all gotten away from that because, for obvious reasons, it made more sense to distribute fish through middlemen, make sure that everything was copacetic that way, and move the larger volume. Many of our fishermen began to return to selling direct from the dock, and it was a beautiful experience. Fishermen and crew were meeting directly with friends and neighbors who knew they were coming down. This time they weren't flying flags coming into the harbor, but they were putting out word on Facebook. And as people came in, there was a tremendous interaction in direct sale. But that can only go so far. It can only accomplish so much. We began to think about other ways that we could support this community. What we hit on was the idea of a win-win. The second win was our fishermen and our community was saying to us, we see a lot of crisis already looming among our friends and neighbors and loved ones who might not be able to have the financial resources to take care of their food needs for their families, given what's about to happen here. We looked in the world and we identified a fish. We identified a small haddock. And the reason why we did that was because there are a lot of small haddock in the water. The New England Fisheries Management Council, NOAA, and all the big regulators say that this is a sustainable fishery. It's an important fishery, and we can target it without doing damage to the habitat or the stock. The other reason we targeted it, though, was because these small haddock do not naturally create a great price in the marketplace. Because they're small, they fillet into small fillets. So when they show up at Whole Foods or Market Basket or wherever, look great, they taste great. So historically, the markets have used this fish, small haddock, to make things like fish cakes and fish salads and other things where they take this small fish, this beautiful little fillet, and they create value added out of it. We decided to do the same. And we decided to do it with a product that became haddock chowder. Okay. The reason for the chowder was because we were looking at our friends and neighbors moving into food banks and food pantries. And we realized that if we made a great haddock chowder, like 20 to 25% haddock, right, which is far above the percentage that we typically go to a chowder, we can buy a lot of haddock from our fishermen. We can guarantee them a fair price and a fair market for a fish that's plentiful and nearby. And then we can transform it into a chowder, which we could then freeze in individualized containers, like 18 ounces. And we could then begin to move that into food banks. And the food banks were saying to us, this is a great idea, because that chowder, when you show up, is a ready-made meal. There is no more processing necessary except thawing it and heating it up. So if you, unfortunately, are in a motel room and all you have is a hot plate, or all you have is a microwave, you can get a great meal for yourself and for your family. And so we targeted the chowder. And what we decided to do was begin to use these fishermen, in this case, these guys are scallopers, but all of our fishermen, to begin to reach out and start to catch chowder, right? So we located a great processor to begin this process. The processor's name is Great Eastern. They're based in Boston. They've just moved to a beautiful big new facility right on the Boston Fish Pier. Family-run business, multi-generation, hire a lot of people. We're looking at COVID challenges, and we came in and we said, we think we can keep your people working if you want to start filleting small haddock for us. They were more than ready. We then identified a chowder maker. Again, Massachusetts-based. The name of the company is Plenus. They're based in Lowell. Again, a multi-generational family-run business with probably 150 employees who specialize in these types of value-added chowder products, fish cakes, things of that kind. So we created infrastructure where our fishermen landed, got the fish trucked right away to Great Eastern. They filleted it. They shipped it on a schedule to Plenus, and Plenus started making us chowder. You see a container here. That's an 18-ounce container. It's frozen. It's these containers that are going out into the food bank world are packaged within a pouch of plastic so that they stay frozen well and the outer container doesn't crack. And we started to reach out now to our food banks and say, can we help you? What do you want? This program grew out of a food bank distribution thing that we've been doing for more than 5 years with our local Cape Cod food banks called Fish for Families. But now we were ready to expand. We reached out to the Greater Boston Food Bank, Merrimack Valley, the Worcester Area Food Bank, Western Mass. Those are the 4 big ones in Massachusetts. They were all very excited to be able to get this product. We were funded through philanthropy, some great philanthropic support through an organization that's national called Catch Together, pulling that together for us, as well as very strong initial financial and thoughtful support from MIT Sea Grant, from the Sea Grant program out of MIT, and later you'll hear from other people as well. So we pulled together a philanthropic donor base to kick this thing off, and we started making this chowder. We also reached out to the state of Massachusetts through the Department of Agriculture, through the Greater Boston Food Bank, and through our friends and neighbors up at the State House. And we got tremendous support from them as well. Massachusetts is really fortunate, and it should be proud, that we have a line item in our state budget, which is an emergency food assistance program. Very few states in the nation do. We do. Last year, it allocated $30 million of state support that goes directly to food banks and food pantries in our Commonwealth to help them pay for food assistance. And a lot of that money goes towards locally created food products, whether it's coming off of farms or whether it's coming off of boats. The MIFAP program and the Department of Agriculture were very supportive of us. The food banks requested that they support us. We qualified for the program, and they started bringing us in as well. Meanwhile, we reached out to the great food bank up in Maine. It's called Good Shepherd. Food banks in Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, then down to Delaware and over to the capital. And we started shipping chowder. By the time we were done in that first year, we delivered over 720,000 servings of haddock chowder to people in our food pantry, food bank, food service communities, which we're extremely proud of. Part of the reason we were able to do that was because we also partnered with Feeding America, the national organization, which many of you know, which does tremendous work supporting food banks and food pantries around the country. They initiated introductions to us, to their partner organizations in our region, and they helped facilitate a lot of the delivery that we were able to accomplish. So the program is perking along. All of you are smart enough to know that there is an Achilles heel here. And the Achilles heel is, this is being driven by philanthropic support. And we do not want this thing to be a one-off. We want to continue to be able to provide this great support. So we began to think to ourselves, what's our next step? How do we begin to build sustainability? We did a lot of thinking about this, and some of it involved, I'll mention, a beautiful program that was created by UMass Amherst and the Gloucester Marine Research Station. Hope I have that name right. To William Austin, to provide us with an intern who was an economics degree master's candidate at UMass, to do a full-on analysis, a granular analysis of this program. Really identify our price points, identify our snags, identify potential revenues, and see where we want to go. We came out seeing that we really had two choices. We could begin to think about this program as an opportunity to reach out into retail and wholesale, to begin to talk with our friends at Whole Foods, who we've worked with before, to begin to discuss the price points with Marketplace, who express strong interest in this, to work through the buyers and the dealers and the slotting fees and all the stuff that goes into supermarket side, and see if we could make this thing work and continue to pay our fishermen what we consider to be a fair, predictable price. The second option we had was to think about food service. Were there ways that institutionally we could begin to provide this product? Maybe we should change its mode of distribution. Maybe instead of being in 18-ounce containers that's using a fair amount of plastic, which isn't always great, maybe we should start to think about 8-pound pouches. And maybe we should begin to make a presentation to institutional settings that respect and appreciate this type of very high quality, locally produced food that also has a great story behind it. We started to think about that, and we started to think about how that might work. And we realized that in a way we were over our heads, because obviously we're fishermen, we're Cape Cod folks. We don't really understand this system. We don't really understand this process. In conversations with our good partners at Sea Grant, they basically said to us, well, we know where you want to go. And the place where you want to go is probably to a fellow by the name of Mark Hayes. And so that is basically how we began to reach out to Mark. And as he reminded me earlier, that was just about a year ago. And Mark, if you're comfortable with that, I can certainly add a bunch more things in terms of numbers and nuts and bolts.
No, but it definitely was a year ago. I mean, it was around right at the end of September. So yeah. It's a long time in some ways, but you know, just around the corner too in some ways. So
yeah, would you like to pick it up with, with our pop-up and what you wanted us to do and how you kicked us off?
Yeah, sure. I think my slide's next. So hi, everybody. Mark Hayes, MIT Campus Dining. I'm actually coming up on 4 years at MIT. Never thought we would be in the middle of the pandemic like this. I know it's fate, whether it's restaurants, university food service, producers, there's a lot of challenges. And but in some ways it also opens up a lot of opportunities. And hearing this story again from Seth, this is nothing new for me, but it's still emotional, and like the impact on the families, whether it's the groups making the soup or doing the processing, or the fishermen down on the Cape. It's just a great story. You can't, you couldn't even make this up. I mean, it's just heartfelt. But so it was about a year ago, I get a call from MIT Sea Grant. Just a bit of background in MIT. So Campus Dining MIT is actually myself, and I'm Assistant Director Heather Ryle. There's two of us. We work with contracted food service operators on campus. Our primary one is Bon Appetit. We also use Restaurant Associates that handles our business school and conference center, both part of the Compass Group. And it's important because they actually assisted us through the whole pandemic. And actually, I'm thinking back to March of 2020 when these MIT and actually most schools were shutting down, students were vacating within like 24, 48 hours. We actually had about 300 students that could not get home, whether it was overseas or even just within the country, for a variety of issues. And some of them stayed all the way from March of 20 through June of 2021, just a couple months ago, that people actually left campus. And so we were serving through the whole thing. So I'm thinking back a year ago, I get an email from the director of MIT Sea Grant. And a lot of you probably are familiar with the grant programs. You have land grant institutions, you have sea grant institutions, you actually have space grant. And MIT is actually those first three. There's actually a fourth one called Sun Grant that looks at renewable energy. So I got an email. It was actually right after I had to close the dining hall due to positive cases. So the stress level was unimaginable. And we have some dining directors out there, exactly what I'm talking about. And I get an email introducing me to what I'm calling the chowder program, and Seth, and we had some introductions. I'm thinking, this is the worst possible time. Closing dining halls. We don't even know what this virus is doing. I'm getting positive tests. We got isolation meals. Runs again. But we only had about 800 students that actually were seniors that came back last fall. But it was a lot of work. We were still learning how to just do things safely. Kitchens were de-densified. Everybody standing 6 feet apart. Some wearing 2 masks. It was across the board. Everybody's kind of worked through it and survived it. So I get an email like, this is the worst time. I fully support local foods. It's a fantastic story, but it's not worth it. And about like 15 seconds later, I said, this is the exact time when something like this needs to happen, right? If we're going to make a social impact, even for a small group of fishermen, this is the time to do it. Is in the middle of a pandemic that we haven't been through for 100 years, anything close to it. So we scheduled some meetings. Seth, MIT Sea Grant, understood the program. I heard the story. I shared the story as much as I could. And we decided, essentially, it was probably mid-October, we started, we're going to be placed in order. We got a pallet in. We were going to do an event right in the middle of the semester, right? First semester we reopened for seniors. I think we had some grad students in. And we did in our student center. So we had actually an interesting scenario for fall meals. We were still learning what to do. So we had a central location that handled breakfast and lunch, and then dinner was back in our residential house system. We actually typically have 6 dining houses, and then we have 4 actually in the fall that are called Cook for Yourself. So as students, you could opt in whether you want to cook for yourself or you could go to a dining house. And it's the first time in MIT history that we required all undergraduates that were going to be on campus to have a meal plan. So that was fall, and then we brought 2,500 back in the spring, but it was the first time. So from a cultural shift, telling everybody that we were going to serve them, we thought there'd be a lot of screaming, but actually, given we were in the middle of a pandemic, actually everybody was relieved that we were doing it. So we set up the pictures actually on the left side in the center in our student center, commonly referred to the stud, or it's building W20. That's how we refer to it. That's Seth. So we actually did a tasting event over lunch. It was hundreds of students, actually some staff actually came in too. And what was kind of interesting, and first I want to step back and say, local, I mean, we could talk local foods all day, but the food has to be good, whether it's a vegetable or a fruit or a fish or a chowder. I mean, you might sell it once, but you're not going to sell it again if it's not a great product. And this chowder is just phenomenal. And I think Seth mentioned earlier that it's like 25% fish. It's all, I mean, you look, it's all fish, right? And it's a meal in itself. So we did a tasting. There you could go. You can see our setup, socially distanced behind sneeze guards and all that stuff, and ran out of chowder. It was a fantastic event. We actually used the rest of the pallet for the remainder of the semester. I think you saw the pictures. The small containers in plastic didn't work too well for food service, so we started working with Seth to look at some better packaging, for institutional use, and that's what we actually have in now. It was an incredible event, great marketing. We worked with a lot of different groups, students, thumbs up across the board. We ran it the rest of the year until we were out. Since we only had 800 students, we typically have around 2,500 or so on meal plans in the fall. So it was barely a third of our normal numbers, and just fantastic. I mean, the stories, did some social media. And again, you can picture, like, this looks great in the photos, but this was in the middle of a semester that was just very trying from a social isolation. There was no dining in anywhere, so you had to take food back. So you actually had to pick it up, and in this case, breakfast, lunch, you had to hump it back across campus a bit, go back to your room. There was no dining rooms open. All of the lounges were closed, so you actually had to go back and eat by yourself because everybody was in a single. So this was one of the few events too that we were really becoming concerned mid-semester with the social isolation students were facing. And we wanted to do something that would be a little more exciting. Obviously, the educational piece and the storytelling was incredible, learning about all the different fishermen and the families and the businesses producing it. And it became kind of like, I would say, one of our signature events, and I even say that for pre-pandemic. I think the emotional impact of this tasting was just incredible. So what that led to is, of course, students said, okay, are you going to keep doing this? So we started planning. We're already in planning for spring semester. As imagine any other dining directors from universities or even high schools are looking at this for spring. We committed to bringing back first, second, and third year students spring semester. It was an opt-in. We still had everything online available. We ended with 2,500 students. So actually, we had as much students that we had to serve in spring that we do in our max period in the fall. So we actually reached out to our restaurant associate colleagues who took over our 4 cook for yourself houses. Essentially, they treat as catered events, treat as catering, but they served in the locations, and then Bon Appetit kept the other 6 locations, and we pretty much were buying this by the pallet, and we served all semester. So actually, the picture on the right was actually restaurant associates team behind 6 foot of plexiglass in Walker Memorial, serving about 180 students out of our East Campus residential house. And we did this across all 10 locations, all semester. Great feedback. I think we ran out a little earlier. We didn't do our forecast as well. I think we ran out about 3 weeks early, so we could probably brought another pallet in. But extremely successful. Then we started having conversations for the fall. For actually what was supposed to be a return to normal. I would say we're 90% return to normal. Back to full meal plans for the 6 dining houses for yourself, for cooking for themselves. But we also decided to look at how we could expand the product for one, but the story component to other parts of campus. So we actually took it into our retail operation, and also, people look at it's MIT. I don't have an unlimited budget. We have our budgets. We have to run numbers. So the retail component actually allows us to mix and match some soups, to balance off cost, because this is a value-added product, high quality, lots of protein. It's not 2 cents an ounce, right? It's just not. But we're able to design our menus, especially in retail, to be able to feature this product every other week. And it's actually coming up this week, so it'll be on the menu on Friday. Been very successful. Lots of the same pictures and some of these marketing pieces we're having retail, and then we're serving it also in our residential program. So it was interesting. I'm thinking back to a year ago. We typically Bon Appetit makes all of their sauces in-house. This was the only soup we have used since I've been on campus that we actually have purchased. It's always been done in-house. So it was interesting from a cultural standpoint, from working with the culinary team that's just been drilled to sauces and soups have to be done in-house. I'm making them understand this product, the source of it, the local component, and there's a strong commitment to local procurement anyway with our dining partners. So we're working through the pieces, understanding how to tell a story as dining staff in a residence hall. It's all part of this rollout in the spring. But it was interesting. Early on, we looked at it too, as we had to de-densify our kitchens. There's all kinds of state regs back then about how you should have your kitchens and physical spacing. So it actually assisted early on in the pandemic, being able to bring some product in that was prepared. And we actually shifted to not just the soup piece, but some other products that we normally would either do in-house or had to be pre-packaged just from a safety component. So again, we took which was a national crisis, and down to the school level, and it allowed us to look at, flexible ways of looking at hybrid menu designs, how to bring in products that might have a little higher price point that makes sense, and for the long term. Because the other piece of this that I committed to Seth is I don't want this to be one or two semester and done, right? Because this is very impactful. We want to work with the group and work with the economics intern to understand how to scale this up. And you could only rely on grants, as Seth mentioned, so long. And we're looking at some different avenues, whether it's institutional. We're actually talking maybe some K through 12 schools. What would make sense, to scale this up? But it's been an extremely, positive program. Setting the product aside, I mean, just the impact that we were able to do, starting last fall, and just hearing the story and then telling the story, because it would have been really easy to say it's just too much to handle. But this is the time when we really needed to step in and support the program and start working with Seth and others to understand some of the challenges, especially from my background being in higher ed for going on 20 years. How can we not as much market it, because I think the marketing speaks for itself, but how to make sure that the product can fit into cost per meal budgets, and stuff learn that term. What's CPM? Oh, it's cost per meal. What is that? So there's some educational on both ends about what some of the challenges would be. And we've had a lot of conversations about how to and this is part of it, was actually being able to step in and talk about this great program and getting feedback and suggestions about how to expand it, because this pandemic might end, but we don't know the next economic problem we might have or the next pandemic we might have. And I think it's a benefit to pull a group like Find together to hear the story, see the product, but to really talk long term about how we can support great programs like this. Because trust me, maybe next there'll be there'll be some other product that's going to be impacting a lot of families. It's a great product and helping solve a lot of problems. So I'm working with Seth and just hearing the story again. It reminded me why I feel like it could have been maybe 15 seconds. This is the time to do this. You can have no better time than in the middle of a crisis to help support people.
Mark, that's
my piece there. But it was a great event. I mean, I'm looking at this. I'm actually thinking we might have to do another one.
I'm thinking that too.
Because there's, so we had two, I kind of think back, this building, two of the classes didn't even know this building before, because one came in, one was remote in the fall. Some of them came back in the spring, but some of this introduction just to all of our campuses, not just MIT, all of them, they were living in their rooms, doing online classes, going down and get food and go back. So it was interesting that this single event actually opened up a lot of different thinking when we get, into the normal day-to-day routine on campuses and what might work and why something won't work. We've learned a lot about how to make things work in the worst possible scenarios. And I think that's what Fine and all the members could help Seth and I navigate, and the whole Fishermen's Alliance of how to look at institutions and how to expand this program. Because again, it's a great product. I mean, and it's and we're not out of this yet, so we need to figure out how to expand it and get it to as many campuses and other institutions as possible.
That's so great, Mark. And I'll just say, to add on, number one, I feel like I should get a course credit from MIT in food service from Professor Hayes.
Let me see if I can do a certificate.
Let me just say that. But the other thing I want to say is that this approach, what I loosely call a pop-up approach, which doesn't require a whole lot of background support, although it does, obviously. We got to heat up the chowder and get it ready to go and get cups and stuff. But we would be very happy to do this anywhere that people feel as though it would be helpful and fun and beneficial. And we do that understanding that there may or may not be a future relationship out of it, but we would be glad to come to a campus, to a school, with some of our staff from the Alliance and do this. I'll say parenthetically that because of this, and because of work with MIT Grant, we're also approaching institutional settings here on Cape Cod. As many of you know, we have an older population here on the Cape. So we're looking at the nursing home community, assisted community, places like that. And we're setting up based on this template, some comparable programs with them that we hope will help our older community here who otherwise would not get access to this great fish, an opportunity to do it. And we invite our fishermen to come with us when we do that. And I'll tell you what, that is something to see. When you start seeing the guys who actually caught the fish standing there talking to people about the experience of it, it's a fantastic thing. And if I could bring that to any of your communities, I would be proud to do that. So just a thought.
Seth and Mark, thank you so much for talking about this project and how it developed. We really appreciate that. We are starting to get a few questions from our audience. So I'd like to share the first one with you, which is from Ashley Luters. And she asks, how do you seek input and feedback from the fisher people? And to what extent are they involved in product development for the chowder or other planned products?
I think that's a question for me, Mark, unless you want to answer it.
Seth.
But it's like, so what we did when we came up with the idea was we have regular meetings with our alliance. So our alliance is composed of from 80 to 100 fishermen. And they're not all on the Cape and Islands, but mostly. So we put out the word and we say, we're thinking about going this route. What do you think? Then we formulated a chowder. And we had a sample batch made and we distributed it on the piers, around the port. Brought it to people's houses, dropped it off in the evenings, and asked everybody to give us feedback, which they did, and it was great. So, for example, less starch, more haddock, different ideas. Oh, too much salt, not enough salt, all kinds of stuff. And so we played it out that way, and then we did our first sample batch, and again followed up by delivering cases so people could see, for example, the packaging and stuff like that. So people understood what that was all about and what our plan was. And then we do a monthly e-magazine. So we reach out to our community. It roughly reaches about 5,000 addresses. And we would be announcing this program as we were rolling along and providing updates. And, we took a trip up to Great Eastern. Here's what the fillet looked like, that kind of thing. So we did it that way. And continue to do it that way. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, Ashley, you can chime in if there's any follow-up that you have to that. I'd like to sort of reformat that question a little bit for Mark too. So Mark, instead of thinking about the fishermen though, you had mentioned that this was a bit, of a departure in terms of how you would normally do things at MIT. And, the staff is going, let's just take a moment to acknowledge the fact that it has been an incredibly long haul for folks who are working in institutional dining, that it's been well over a year of consistent putting out fires, emergency crisis response, and you're still, I think we've been hearing a lot from folks about how there's extensive labor issues and supply chain issues with fill
Right.
rates for your orders coming in
Yeah,
in
that's,
very unexpected ways. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about thinking about the impact on your staff and whether this chowder was something that helped or added, did it actually create some work?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces. So one, you get, a lot of dining programs, not unique to MIT or anything, but there's a lot of scratch cooking. I mean, that's, focus on quality, local products. I mean, that's not unique. I mean, that's a lot of schools really focus on varied menus and this type of thing. But during this time, it was kind of interesting. The reason we went to the centralized serving is we thought we would have significant staffing issues. And we didn't know. I mean, this was planning over the summer, we planned all summer for the fall. So in some ways sometimes we overthink things. At MIT, we overthink things. We actually overplan. And we did not have near the staffing challenges that we did now. I'm not saying we didn't have positive tests. We actually closed some dining halls. We lost one dining hall, 18 staff had to go in quarantine at once, right? So we did have some challenges. We did have other dining halls. So we still had some flexibility, but initially the thought that we knew we were going to be doing a lot, it was all takeout. We knew we had a lot of whether we were going to pre-package items or buy pre-packaged items. So it was actually a hybrid, which we would normally not do in a residential dining program. It's all buffet style, self-serve, cook to order type thing. You're not bringing in pre-packaged desserts for safety, pre-packaged yogurt, yogurt containers. You're doing parfaits or you're making them yourself. So we shifted. So culturally, actually mentally, for a lot of the culinary team, it was a big change because it was always about quality, always about variety. We had to scale the menus down because we had to have less people in the kitchens, because we didn't want to, we only had limited space and trying to work 6 feet apart and, running HEPA filters and everything else. But people were very nervous because we just didn't know, but we had to serve. So this was one product that actually, versus like bringing in a local, a yogurt or something, that's packaged, that actually had a story behind it that actually kind of helped the situation for the staff that, I want to say there was a lot of overtime in the fall. I mean, there are people that got nervous, decided not to want to work. So we had some filling in of shifts, less about product issue because we only had 800 students at the time in terms of being able to get deliveries, but just worried every day about, am I going to get a phone call at 11 p.m. from MIT Medical saying, Mark, guess what? We have to close something, right? Well, luckily we had minimal of those, but it allowed us to think about, what would be next, how products like this, even on campuses that want to say we're making everything from scratch, could actually fit into this for a lot of different reasons, let alone the quality piece, but the story piece and the supporting the local business piece. So I think we took an opportunity here in a really bad time to really start thinking about some other pieces. And I think on one of these, it said something about skate. We were talking, Seth and I were talking about, well, maybe what's next? I go, fish cakes. We would go through a ton of fish cakes, right? What's the opportunity with doing haddock cakes or using the skate or something? So some different ideas actually, and I actually think the fish cakes came out of one of our residential dining houses from one of the chefs and his team said, you know what, if you had fish cakes, we could add fish cakes to the menu because we normally would do them, right? And it just made sense. And thinking there's some products that we don't know what the labor market's going to be. And for restaurants, it's terrible. I mean, in different universities is good and bad. We're a union shop at MIT. So we have some very dedicated folks that have been on campus 15, 20 years. So we're actually in a good place, but that's not the case for everybody. So I think there's some opportunities for these value-added products and the really good products to actually balance off menus and production capabilities, depending on the facilities and the staffing at different schools. So that's something we started thinking through a little bit. You know,
You know, Mark, that
how
was
this
actually a
and
question
we're
that
talking
somebody
robotics
asked.
too. You know, we got a whole robotics. I mean, MIT, we have, you know, and we had students saying, you know, we could do the fish cakes with robots, right? I mean, we never know what might happen. So it's interesting, the conversations that just doing the tasting in the fall generated, that then led to the full semester commitment. And just some of the ideas that have bubbled out of it for student projects. You know, somebody wanted to go down and go fishing. I had a couple of students after this tasting actually wanted to go help, right? Go down and, you know, sometime whenever the boats were going out again. So it was interesting what, you know, something really small hot could grow, and in the worst possible time. So I think it was an idea that really germinated across, whether it was the student body or even in the culinary team, to think about what the possibilities would be. So it was exciting.
So we have a couple other questions, and one of them actually you've started to answer, Mark, which is about what other products might be able to be produced either with haddock or with other species, something that could be successful like the chowder was. So
Yeah.
I certainly have heard of a couple of other groups that are interested in this kind of model. There may be a couple of folks in our audience who are thinking about that. If there are ideas that you want to share, we'd love to hear about it. You can throw it in the chat, or if you want to follow up later, we'd love to hear about that. And Seth, are there some products that you're working on too,
Yeah.
or
So
ideas?
one of the things that we've been thinking about is, yes. So we sort of marketed this. We call the line, the product line, we call it Small Boats, Big Taste. Small Boats, Big Taste. That's sort of what we're working under. And that's because our alliance sort of goes by the motto, Small Boats, Big Ideas. So it's kind of a riff off of that. And we realized that whether it's wholesale, retail, or in food service, if we were begin to build a product line and not just a single product, it would be smart, number one. And number two, it would really help our fishermen. So I'll give you an example. Right now, our fishermen have had a great deal of success landing skate. Not going skating, although we joke about that, but landing the skate as a product, as a fish, as a species. It's a beautiful fish. If we were in Paris right now, you'd be going out to a 4-star restaurant and ordering it, and it would be in the middle of the plate with some capers and some butter sauce, and you'd be paying 30 euros for it or whatever. Here in this country, skate is an underloved, underutilized fish, but it's very plentiful. So can we do something along the lines of what Mark is talking about? Could we make a skate cake? Could we make a skate stew? You know, could we do something with skate? And by the way, directly benefit another whole segment of our fishing fleet that focuses on skate for a significant part of the year and sells it at a rather low value because it just winds up getting cut and frozen and shipped in large containers overseas as a low value added product for us. So there's an example. We've been thinking hard about shellfish. Strangely enough, the pandemic has impacted the shellfishing community inordinately. I could go into the details of why and how that all works, but suffice to say that oysters on the half shell, when there's no restaurant, do not move. And let me also suffice to say that oysters don't know about pandemics, so they keep growing. So you have all beautiful oysters on the flats, but they're getting to be big for an American market. We don't love huge oysters. We don't like slurping them, right? So what do you do with them? Do you make an oyster stew? Do you make a chowder? Do you make a frozen product? Do you do value added somehow? So there's a lot of opportunity out there. And we're beginning to explore that. And in fact, with help from MIT Sea Grant, we have some continued funding in terms of COVID response to really do a bunch of that and to do some outreach this coming 8 months or so in the greater Boston area with chefs, on the Cape with fishermen, to really see what we can do to diversify.
Seth, we have a couple more questions, really trying to get at a little more detail on the impact for the fishers. So Ashley asked sort of a follow-up about making sure that this has the desired impact for fisher people when you're talking about the final product. But Tyson kind of goes into this a little bit more deeply, Tyson Razor, saying that it was some great work in establishing a supply chain for the product, but as the work continues to establish the chowder as a long-term asset, so not reliant on grant funding, he's wondering who will be purchasing the fish from the fishermen and who will ultimately take ownership of the haddock chowder to sell to institutions or others. Our Great Eastern Seafood and Plenus Group in this effort for the long haul. And in a long-term for-profit model, can you talk about how much the final value add chowder might cost the end buyer, whatever metric makes sense to you? So I think the first question is, how does this impact the fishermen long-term? You mentioned that there were 28 fishermen who were in this first year, but you have well over 100 in the Alliance, and there are others outside of that as well. What are some ways that you might see this scaling impact for those fishermen? And then also, what are the role of the other partners in the long term?
Yeah, so the Alliance plans to continue to be the owning agent. So we're obviously we're a community organization. We're a 501c3. So we represent the fishing community here on the Cape and Islands primarily, not only. So we will continue to be the agent that is facilitating all of this. Both Plenus and Great Eastern have expressed great interest in continuing to partner with us. Both of them have asked us if we want to consider having them take a more proprietary role in the production. And so far we are not doing that. The reason why we're not doing that is that we want to hold on to the important story that is behind this and continue to build a product that is going to directly benefit our fishermen and hold the price line on that. So we guaranteed a price this past winter to fishermen landing this small haddock of $1.50 a pound, round fish arriving at the dock. And that price then turned around and defined a lot of the production costs. That price was probably higher, it was higher than fishermen would have gotten on the open market at the auction. But we believe it's a fair, predictable, sustainable price. And it's a price that also takes into account a request to target a specific fish and not just, fish for what's immediate. So we'll continue to be pricing the fish in that point, roughly speaking. We have to kind of see what happens this year. Could go up, could go down. But we got very strong support from our fishermen for that price. And as far as the reliability of our infrastructure, of our partnerships, so far really good. I suppose there's nothing guaranteed in this world, and there are other people who do this work, but in both cases we felt that we set on family-owned businesses that really treat people in their operations well and have a high degree of quality and accountability. So I hope that answers it. In terms of end cost, right now we're seeing, roughly speaking, that for one of those 18-ounce containers, it's costing us a little bit over $4 to produce back all the way, soup to nuts, to get it to somebody. Now, in food service, that cost comes down because we don't have to package in 18-ounce plastic pouches and containers. So it's very great for us to be able to bring that cost down and try to pass that savings on to Mark and anybody else who's interested in a food service model. Those containers are more than a pound, just so you know. They're not 16 ounces. So that gives you a ballpark of where we're at. There are ways that our economics master's student has suggested that we can make some savings and still deliver the benefit that we want to deliver to our community. And we're working on that too. So work in progress. So far, so good.
Thanks, Seth. So one last question we had, and we don't have a lot of time for it. So very briefly, if you don't mind, do you know how many ingredients are in the chowder, either one of you? And are any of them, besides the fish, also locally produced?
Wow, how many ingredients? That I don't know. It's right on the packaging, obviously. If I was able to
actually
follow up and
zoom
send
in
that
on
via
one.
email.
I'm trying to remember. I remember looking at it, but We could certainly pull a label for you though.
Yeah, if by the magic of Zoom, I could take that container I'm showing you right now and turn it around, you'd see all the ingredients. They're all there. But as
We
far
can
as
follow up by
local,
email.
yeah, as far as local goes, yes, we had a great discussion with Drumlin Farm. For some of you who know Drumlin Farm, the Mass Audubon Society farm, about using their potatoes. So for example, there were some glitches in that we wound up not being able to do it, but we've been trying to build that. Milk is from New England. Leeks, I don't know where they come from. There's no preservatives in it. There is something called niacin, which is a seaweed-based product that gets added to a lot of things, which replaces a preservative, which is a wonderful product that people like Whole Foods really celebrate. So that the seaweed, I don't think comes from New England. I think that comes from elsewhere. I'm trying to think of what else. There's a little bit of salt. I don't know.
That's great, Seth. Thank you so much.
All right.
So I would just like to thank all of you for joining us, and also thank Seth and Mark for sharing this story. I'd like to ask all of you to please remember to fill out our survey. And also, we hope that we'll see you joining us again for another one of our fall webinars that are lined up for this coming season. The next one is taking place on October 6th. All of our webinars, we're planning them for Wednesdays between 2 and 3 p.m. And the next one, like I said, is on October 6th, and it's going to be looking at the role of prison labor in institutional supply chains, where you might find it, how to watch out for it, what that means for transparency or lack of in supply chains. And this is part of an ongoing focus that we have on labor issues in farm to institution supply chains. We have a number of other great webinars, and we hope that you'll join us. The one on October 6th is with Claire Brown from The Counter, who will be talking about her investigative look into this issue. So not shying away from some deep issues. But there's a lot more to continue in terms of the conversation and the work. And there's some other ways that you can also connect with us. We have a dining operators listserv. So if you are a dining operator, this is a great place to go for peer support, sharing of info and resources, ideas, connections. You can join easily and just connect there for dining operators. We also, for our larger campus network, we have a Farm and Sea to Campus Network Facebook group, so you can join easily on Facebook. And of course, we welcome other ideas. So if there are ideas that you have for content that we could be sharing, that information that you would like to see, speakers you'd recommend, we'd love to hear from you. We also host occasionally open forums to bring more ideas and people together to talk about things. So if there are ideas that you have for that, we'd love to hear from you. You can email me anytime at tanya@farmtoinstitution.org. And finally, just again, there's my contact info if you want to get in touch, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks again for those of you who fill out the survey. We really appreciate it. And Seth and Mark, thanks one more time for joining us. It was great to hear from you and hear about this story. We look forward to hearing more about this.
Thanks,
everybody.
Tanya. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.